Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right, well, I'm here today with Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, and he is from Utah. He's a physician, a spiritual mentor, a speaker, an author, an artist, and a healer. And I've just finished his book for the second time, Not Yet, Near Life Experiences and Lessons Learned. And it's a beautiful book of not all of, but many, many of his spiritual experiences. And I was edified both times when I read it, and I've related to it because I've had some similar experiences. And so I'm excited to have you on and excited to hear some of the stories and the spiritual experiences you've had.
It's so good to be with you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So let's start out. First of all, what got you interested in spirituality? Did you have a moment where you thought, wow, there's something here and I like this?
I had some wonderful, profound spiritual experiences that I kept to myself for 20 or 25 years. And when I finally started to share some of them, something just clicked in my head one day when I woke up and said, it's okay to share now. And so when I started to share some of my experiences, people asked me that very question that you just asked me, what started this or how did it happen? And I had never thought about it before. And that caused me a lot of introspection. I finally came to the conclusion, I thought back, and I think it started when I was just a month before my 12th birthday. My older brother was killed in a farm accident. He tipped a tractor over. And I think that's when it started. A few years after he died, I was driving a car on a narrow, windy country road after dark. I was going 60 miles an hour, had two friends in the car. None of us were wearing seatbelts. And a voice, that voice that wraps itself around your soul that you can't miss or ignore, came and said, you need to slow down. I slowed down. I went around the corner and ran into a Cadillac head on. There was a lot of damage to the vehicles, but nobody was hurt. And I think that if I hadn't have slowed down, if I hadn't have heard that voice, I might have died that night. And I believe that was my brother speaking to me. And that's where it started somehow, was with my brother when he died.
Often I think death of a loved one, I sometimes think trauma can open us up to the spiritual realm. I don't know if you feel like that or if you've noticed that. Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I have seen that. I'm in a community with a lot of people who have had near-death experiences. Many of your listeners will know some of these people. Mary Neal is a spine surgeon who wrote a New York Times bestseller. She's a friend of mine. Eben Alexander is a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience when he had meningitis, and he's a friend of mine. And I have a lot of people in that community. And when people have something profoundly traumatic like that, especially if they clinically die and then are resuscitated, a lot of times it seems that door never fully closes, and it unmasks these latent spiritual tendencies that they have. They enjoy them and sometimes don't enjoy them, I suppose, the rest of their lives. And for me, I worked in the emergency department for 25 years. I was an emergency physician. I saw a lot of people leave this life, and I saw a handful of people that entered this life during my career. And it's my experience. This is how I think of it. This is the metaphor I use. When people come into this life or when they leave, they pass through this heavy curtain or veil, if you will. And beyond the veil is this profound light, this glory and love. And if you happen to be in the area, whether physically or spiritually, if you're in the geography when somebody passes through the veil, either coming or going, sometimes some of that light spills through and splashes onto you, and you get to experience it with them for a time. And if the veil's open wide enough or stays open long enough, sometimes you might even see inside. You might even see somebody you know and communicate with them. And so I had many of those kind of opportunities during my emergency department career. And those are some of the ones I share, like you said, in my book. And I had many I didn't share. And that's the metaphor. That's how I think of it. I think that's one of the reasons I had a lot of experiences.
I love that the curtain would part and maybe some of that light spills out. I think that's beautiful. However, not everyone experiences that, the glimpsing into heaven. Do you think there's a reason why some do, some don't?
I think there's several reasons. Most of them I probably don't understand or have any knowledge about. My immediate answer when people ask me that question is simply, I don't know why some people experience it and others don't. But I have learned some things. And one of them is everybody has gifts, and not everybody's gifts are the same. Some people hear things, some people feel things, some people see things. Some people have the gift of compassion or patience or organization. I mean, the gifts are innumerable and everybody has some. And sometimes we get into trouble if we start envying or desiring too badly someone else's gift instead of recognizing and developing our own. So when I meet with people, because I now have clients all over the world and most of my sessions are via Zoom, when I meet with people, I help them discover their own gifts and develop their own gifts. This is the way I think about it with some of these spiritual experiences. We're perfectly comfortable with the idea that somebody can have a musical gift, but they still have to practice 40,000 hours to become proficient on the piano. But we tend to look at spiritual gifts and somehow have the mistaken notion that they come upon us perfected and just ready to be exercised without any effort on our part. And that's not the way it works. You have to start small with the most insignificant seeming things and work at it on a regular basis over years of time until you develop that gift, and then you can enjoy it more fully.
I totally agree. I have felt that within my own soul because I've had glimpses of spiritual gifts from my childhood and kind of went latent when you're like, oh, I'm nervous about that. I don't know how to handle that. And then start to reawaken in adulthood and realize to hone those, you do have to practice. And so, what are some of the ways you practice those spiritual gifts or that people could?
The key word is practice. So when you get up in the morning, when you do your routine, whether it's prayer or meditation, yoga, exercise, whatever you do to get centered for the day, ask this question.
I'm going to write this down. Hang on. I'm ready.
What can I do today to serve someone else? And I promise you, you will get an answer. It might be a voice, it might be a feeling or an impression. You might see a flash of someone's face in your mind. You might be inclined to go deliver a gift to somebody or simply send them a text message and say, hey, I was thinking about you. The key is that you have to act on that thought or that feeling. And when you act on it, it becomes real. And you start to realize, oh, that wasn't a coincidence. That wasn't just a passing thought. That was a message, and I honored it. And the next day, when you ask the same question, it'll become more clear. And a few weeks or a few months down the road, when you ask the question, you'll have more confidence in what you're doing because you've had so many successes. And don't get discouraged if you don't have success one day. If it doesn't work, that's okay. It's not going to work every time. And that's the counsel. That's a first step I often give people in their spiritual experiences with this caveat. If I'm working with a woman in particular, I caution them. You're already giving so much of yourself. You don't have to go serve someone else to have a spiritual experience. Just ask the simple question, what should I do today? Because I've asked that question on occasion and the answer came back, enjoy this day which I have given you. Sometimes it's about self-care. I don't have that issue very often with men, but if I'm working with a woman, I always add that caveat. Don't give away too much of yourself because you have to have self-care. You have to be a vessel to receive and to be healthy and to be whole.
I'm so glad you said that because that as you were talking, I wanted to say I often hear to take care of myself.
Don't think that it's always something big or complex.
Yes.
One day the message came to me, tell your wife you love her. One day I prayed and I said, what should I do today? And the message came, be kind. And I said, oh, come on, you can do better than that. I want something big, bold, but I'd received my message. Here's the rub, and you'll appreciate this because you have children. We were putting our kids in the car to go on a road trip, and they were driving me nuts. They were noisy and bickering at each other occasionally and doing all the things kids do. And I just wanted to turn around and strangle them. But I kept saying, be kind, don't kill them today. And at the end of the day, I was writing in my journal, and I remember writing about how grateful I was for that divine message in the morning that seemed so simple and was perfect. Because what if I'd have spent all this time trying to give them a wonderful memory, and the one thing they remembered was Dad got mad and lost his temper. Simple messages are divine.
I love that because that is exactly what would happen. Like that trip was miserable because Dad got mad. I love that idea to just tune in.
I had a profound experience when my youngest son was, I think he was about 5 or 6 years old. And it changed the way I think about heaven and my interactions with the divine. I came home from a long, difficult shift. I was tired. I laid down. I was vegetating in front of the TV for a few minutes, and I heard this cry from the basement. And it was one of those ones a parent recognizes was more than just, the usual. I thought, oh no, he's injured. And I looked at my wife and I said, he's just going to have a scar because I'm not going back to the ER tonight. And sure enough, a few minutes later, his brother carried him up the stairs and he had this big gash above his eye. And I swallowed hard and put him in the car. And a little bit later, we were back in the ER. And I was injecting his wound, which is the painful part of it all. And as I'm anesthetizing his wound, he looked up at me and he said, "Please, Dad, don't hurt me anymore." And I thought about it and I thought, I have all this perspective as a father, as an emergency physician. I knew what the scar would look like if it wasn't taken care of. I knew how brief his pain would be as I anesthetized his wound, and then it wouldn't hurt anymore while I was fixing it. I knew all this. And yet he's saying, "Please, Dad, don't hurt me anymore." And I thought, so many of our prayers are, "Please, Father, please, Mother, don't hurt me anymore." And they're up there saying, "But I'm doing what's best for you." And we're saying, yeah, I know, but please don't hurt me anymore. And God has a lump in her throat and she's saying, "Please trust me." And we're saying, "Oh, if you could just see things from my perspective, I'm sure you'd change your mind." And so now I try not to have those prayers of "Please don't hurt me anymore." I try to have those prayers of "Give me the wisdom to learn what I need to learn from this experience and use it to help others."
I love that perspective. And I think that is really what your book speaks to. You have gained so much wisdom through your experiences that you're now able to share and bless the lives of others. And you've asked for some of those. And it sounds like from your book that you did pray for an experience to have a real deep understanding of other people's suffering. Do you think that's something beneficial to pray for? What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a tender spot in my life. It was so difficult. It was so horrible. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for what I learned from it. But I hesitate to tell somebody or suggest to somebody that they pray for difficult experiences because a lot of times you'll get what you ask for. I think one of the reasons we're here is to learn empathy. I think empathy is a profoundly important thing to learn. And it's okay to ask for help to learn empathy. And I tell people now, trust God and ask for an experience that's within your capacity, something that's ready for you and that you're ready for, and to learn a little bit at a time without being overwhelmed, because you don't want an experience that works to your detriment rather than your benefit. And so I think it's important to trust and to
Mhm.
learn empathy.
Did you feel prompted to ask for that hard experience?
It was complete naivete. A woman approached me in a public place and she said, "I know you from somewhere." And we had that conversation, figured out I'd taken care of her husband in the emergency department years before. That's how she knew me or recognized me. And as we talked, I learned that her husband had just died in a car crash. They had 6 children. She had just given birth to their sixth child when he died. And I had a daughter the same age. My youngest daughter was born about the same time. So I had an immediate feeling of empathy for her. Her grieving was deeper and more in depth than almost anybody I've ever met. And I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how. And one day I was driving home from the emergency department in the middle of the night, and a voice asked me, "Is Rebecca's family less important in my eyes than yours?" I call her Rebecca in my book. And I thought, of course not. No. Then why should they be in yours? And I resisted initially because it's my wife and children. I thought those have to be my first priority. But at the same time I thought that, I had an understanding, and I got a download, and I understood the voice that was speaking to me loved all souls equally, and that I should too, and that I could. So I asked without thinking about it at all. I just asked, I said, "Can I take some of her spiritual burden and carry it for her for a time?" And the answer was yes. And the heaviness and sorrow and sadness, the loneliness and grieving, everything that was her life settled onto mine. And it went on for years,
Mm.
for almost 5 years.
Wow.
It was so bad one day. I sat down on the bed because I thought I might fall down. I was at home, and it closed in on me until I literally thought I might die. Mind you, I'm an emergency physician, and I thought that I might die. And in the midst of that, I heard a voice say, "This is the way Rebecca felt the day her husband died." And so I was given this profound gift of empathy. I wasn't a woman. My spouse hadn't died, but I was given this experience, and it was explained to me, this is how she felt. And that was just one of the experiences, of course, in 5 years. And it taught me so much. About the time I was coming out of that horror, out of that darkness, I met a man whose wife had just died. And he was involved in a car crash, and he had a near-death experience. He had an out-of-body experience with his newly deceased wife. And then he was flown to my trauma center, and I went in to see him. He was unconscious on the gurney, and his newly deceased wife was standing in the air above the gurney. And I saw her, and she communicated with me. About a month later, he'd had several surgeries. He was awake enough to talk then, and we met and spoke for the first time, and we're still dear friends today. When we had our first real substantive conversation out of the hospital, I learned that he was really struggling to somehow reconcile what he'd experienced out of his body in another realm and what he'd been taught all his life, because there were some things that didn't fit up very well. And I came home that night after our first conversation. I wrote in my journal that for the very first time, I was grateful for my years in the darkness because I knew the answers to his questions and I knew how to help him. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's only a sliver of the experience. Every experience is to enable us to help someone else. And a messenger came and taught that to me. And I said, wait a minute, because sometimes I argue with
I do too.
with my guides.
I do too.
I said, wait a minute, I thought experiences were for personal growth. And then we could go help people if we wanted. And my messenger said, the primary purpose of every experience is to enable you to help someone else. You get the secondary benefit of personal growth. Totally changed my perspective about why we go through hard things.
I love that. Back to the empathy. Do you think some people that's their spiritual gift and other people need to practice that through maybe having those little glimpses, those little moments through those experiences?
Absolutely. I think some people come by it more naturally and other people have to work at it.
So I have a question on that. I'm an emotional empath all my life, and it's felt overwhelming, even from my childhood, where it was like, ooh, I've got to block how they feel because I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to change it. And then I'll try to people please so that they'd feel good, so I can feel good and safe. But there have been times in my life where I've wanted to turn that off
Yes,
because it can
me
feel
too.
overwhelming.
I agree wholeheartedly. I've had those experiences where I wanted to turn it off as well. And you can turn it off, but you
At
turn
what
off the good
cost?
with the bad. And so one of the things I work with my clients with is learning how to set boundaries, spiritual boundaries. People are fine with setting physical boundaries in the physical world. You know, just because somebody car's breaks down, they come and say, I need you right now to drive me someplace, and you're in the middle of doing something important. You set boundaries. You say, I can help you. I can help you on at this time. I can drive you this far. This is what I can do for you. And you establish boundaries. You don't just, because they request it, take on everything they ask you to, right? Well, the same's true with spiritual things. You can set boundaries, and people really are surprised when I first bring this up. But you have to remember, spirits are just people that happen to not be in their physical form anymore. And so they're the same people. They have the same personality. And it's okay to say, I can help you now, or I can help you tomorrow. I can do this for you. That's too much. I can't take that right now. It's okay to do that in a spiritual realm as well as the physical.
I love that. And so, how do you balance life with being open spiritually and having boundaries? I love this idea of spiritual boundaries. I'm not very great at it. It's either all or none for me.
Yeah, you can put up the metaphysical I'm closed sign and take a break, and it's okay. I was in prayer one night, and a spirit came to me and asked me to deliver a message to his brother, who was a friend of mine. And he gave me the message, and I asked him, I said, well, why don't you just go deliver it? And he said, oh, he won't receive it from me. So a day or two later, I went to my friend and I was really anxious about it. I didn't want to come off like a nut. And I asked him, I said, do you have brothers and sisters? And he goes, yeah. And he started rattling off his siblings and he mentioned one that was dead. And I said, you have a deceased brother? And he goes, yeah. And I still was reluctant. It was a check in the right direction. Oh, this was a real experience, but I was still anxious about it. And I said, I had a feeling about your brother, and he seemed to share something with me. And I put all these qualifiers on it. I finally told him what I had received, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that's my brother. I know that's my brother." And I said, "Well, why didn't he just come tell you?" And he said, "Oh, I wouldn't have received it from him." So sometimes I guess we can be the messenger or the instrument, and where I can help, I'm happy to help.
And do you feel like do you feel like you're open to most things now of I'm willing to help when needed?
Yes, mostly. I still have some cautions. I still have some anxieties at times. Some days I think I can do anything as long as I'm directed and it's the right thing to do. And there's other days I'm thinking, ooh, that could be really difficult. I'd like to be more fearless, but sometimes I'm very cautious.
I'm glad to hear that. I am glad to hear that because I think sometimes people maybe misunderstand that if they're called to being a messenger that you won't have any fear around it. And I don't think that's true because I'll share one experience I had with a doctor, actually, my doctor, and it was very intimidating because I was going to a doctor's appointment and his father came to me and had a message for me to give to him as well. And first of all, most medical doctors are not open to the spiritual realms. And so I was like, you can't tell me this. This is too terrifying. And so we had the appointment, and same thing, very cautiously feeling him out like, was your dad a doctor? Because his dad was a doctor. I didn't know anything about his personal life. And has he passed on? And then I delivered this message and he got emotional. And so I could tell it touched him. But I was terrified to share this with him, and I think it was a little bit traumatizing to me, honestly, to be like, please don't ask me to do that, please don't ask me to do that again. So I probably need to make peace, and maybe you have advice on that, how to make peace with spiritual messages that do come to you and how to share those with other people.
It can be a challenge. One of the things I learned is that you have to use the language of the person to whom you're speaking. You have to learn how to meet people where they are, not where you are necessarily. You have to use words that they can understand and resonate with. For example, I have some people who have had these profoundly spiritual experiences, but they don't feel like they can talk with their family or friends about them because they may have different belief systems. And I'll explain, listen, you can talk with your family and friends and you can say, I had this really profound feeling. It moved me emotionally and it made me want to do this, or it made me feel this, or I felt like I knew something. And you can use this language with people that makes them comfortable, that makes them open to receive it. And when you're standing looking in the mirror at yourself, or you're talking to a friend that's a believer, you can say, God came to me and he gave me a message, and this is what he said. And at first, you feel like you're being somehow untrue to the messenger if you cloak the message in language that the recipient will receive. But I've learned that no, you have to meet people where they are. And if you need to use different words and different language to do it, that's okay. It's the message that's important. I had an experience about 35 years ago. I went to see a friend of mine who was twice my age. He was steeped in soul stretching experience. He'd survived a foxhole on Okinawa, and he believed in blessings and laying on of hands. And he offered to give me a blessing. I said, yes, of course, I'd love that. And he laid his hands on my head and he began to speak. And in that blessing, he told me, teach people the truth in such a way as to cause them to realize they've always known it. And I've tried to follow that counsel. You have to meet people where they are and then give them an aha moment that leads them to their next step. But it has to be their next step, not yours.
I love that. Is there one experience in your life that really stands out to you as that was an incredible spiritually changing experience for me?
Yes, two come to mind immediately. Is it okay if I share two?
I would love him. Yes.
One of them came a couple of years ago when I was getting ready to speak to a large group. And I take it very seriously. I try to connect and I say, what's the message? What should I share? I was preparing to speak to this group, and the message came profoundly clear and direct in three parts. The voice said, tell them they're enough, tell them they're divine, tell them they're loved. And I shared the message, and it was well received. And not long after that, I was talking with somebody who makes their living, very lucrative compensation, traveling around the world as an international public speaker. And I must have said something that made him think I wanted his advice, because he started talking to me about how you have to adjust your message to your audience. You have to know your audience and make your message fit with the audience. And I remember thinking about what he said one day and thinking, how do I adjust my message? And that same voice came back to me and said, I gave you the message. I'll bring you the audience. So it was a good check for me to remember, I don't have to adjust the message. The audience will come and they'll hear what they need to hear. The second experience is when I had one day when I felt like I was connected with heaven. I felt like I was getting answers to my questions, and I had a very good experience, and I thought I was done. And I got up and left my room to go to a different part of the house. And as I did so, I was overwhelmed with this profound, immeasurable, incomprehensible love. It was so powerful. It was so unconditional. It was so beyond anything I'd ever felt before. It moved me to tears, and I sank back to my knees. And I said, who are you? And the voice said, I am your mother. And there's a lot of things I don't know and don't pretend to know, but I know this. I know there is a profound, infinite, omnipotent, divine presence in heaven, and I know she loves me. And I suspect she loves all of you as well.
Yes, I believe that and love that. That's one of my recent journeys has been through contemplating love and divine love and how to access it. Do you have advice or tools in helping us? Because I believe it is the power of the universe. It is all that is. It's really all that matters is this divine love. Are there ways that you've been able to access that more frequently, or has that, changed your life, or how do you see love in general?
For a lot of years, I had a hard time loving, and I had a hard time expressing love. And I finally came to realize that I had been wounded so deeply by my brother's death that I didn't want to get close to anything or love it enough that it could hurt me when it was gone. And it took me a long time to work through that, but I'm a lot better now. I had an experience in the emergency department one day. I walked into a room and there was a homeless gentleman sitting on the gurney. He was wearing tattered, soiled clothing. He had long, unkempt hair and a beard. He struggled with substance use, and he was having a rough time in his life. His shoes had holes in them. He'd been walking around in the snow. His feet were in rough shape. I filled a wash basin with warm water, put some soap in it, and I sat down at the foot of the gurney with a wash rag, and I took off his shoes, and I removed the last threads of his socks, and I washed his feet. And in the process of doing it, something miraculous happened. Everything that was earthly or temporal or physical regarding this man was drawn back, and I saw who he was, and I understood I was in the presence of the divine. I went into the room thinking I was going to serve him, and I realized he was there ministering to me. And I understood that we're always next to God, whether we're sitting in church or in the gutter, because that's who everybody is. That's who we are. And I viewed every soul differently since that experience. It taught me this man was the antithesis of everything the world defined as success, and yet he was God. And I felt it, and I knew it, and I understood it in that moment. And if he did nothing else with his life except give me that piece of knowledge in that moment, his life was a success. We judge people so much on so many criteria. And the problem is we're not good judges.
Right.
We label things incorrectly so much of the time. Is wealth good or bad? Is health good or bad? We label things incorrectly. And then once we've labeled them, we don't have to deal with them anymore because we've judged them, we've labeled them, and, and we've established where they belong in our life. And that's a very perilous place to go. The most difficult things, the most unsightly things are often the very best things for us.
I think that's a beautiful experience. Very, very beautiful. For me, love is one of those questions, and I think most of us have been wounded in our lives in childhood, and to not feel loved, I think I came up with what I call the perfect love theory, where we miss that divine love, that perfect love. We felt it before, we know what it is. And when we're away from it and we're with other humans that are still just trying to figure themselves out and life out and don't love unconditionally, we feel that loss and that sense of core wounding. And then we long for it. And we're like, where is it? Where can I find it? And I think maybe that's been my drive to guide me to spirituality, was seeking that love. Where is that divine love? Sometimes I wish I could feel it all the time. And have you found in your life as you've grown spiritually that you have access to that more and more, or does it still come and go in your life?
It still comes and goes. My wife had an experience where she felt that divine love, and it went on. It kind of slowly faded over a few days. And she asked, she said, "Can I experience it all the time?" And the voice said, "No, no, you can't have it all the time.
Why?
It defeats the purpose of us being here." I prayed earnestly about this. Why are we here? Everybody's got their theories about why we're here. And I suspect there's some truth in all of them. But on this particular occasion, when I prayed and I asked about why we're here in the context of some of the experiences I've shared with you, it was explained to me, it's easy to love someone when you see their divinity. You're here living under the illusion that you're something less than. If you can love yourself and others when you can't see their divine nature.
Yeah.
It's an illusion that we're less than divine.
Yes.
We've been divine for eons and ages. We were divine long before we were born. We have divine progenitors, and being human does not make us less divine. It's very important, I think, for people to realize that their worth is infinite and eternal and unchanging. You may do things that have consequences. Choices have consequences, but they don't change your worth. They don't change the unconditional love that God has for his or her children. It's a serious disservice we do to people or our children or anyone when we teach them that they somehow have to earn divine love or that they earn their eternal reward. We don't earn these things, they're gifts. Now,
Amen.
choices have consequences, and sometimes they're serious consequences, but they don't change your worth. And the reason that's so important is because there's this multi-billion-dollar self-help industry that would have us believe that you're the sum total of what you do, that your choices are who you are. It's not so. You are what you are, and what you are is a divine, infinite, eternal soul whose worth does not change. And when you understand that, and you go out and you do something and it doesn't turn out the way you had hoped, you don't say, "Oh, I'm a failure." You say, "I'm a divine being of infinite worth, and I made a choice that had an untoward outcome, and I'll make a different choice in the future. But I'm still who I am."
Mm-hmm. And I view that as learning opportunities. What a great opportunity that we have here on this planet to learn and to remember who we are and practice remembering who others are and who we are. Is there a way, because I completely agree and love this message. However, I can understand it intellectually. How do you get it in your heart when we've been so conditioned to feel like we have to earn love? We have to earn, because I think that is how a lot of parents parent. How do we get that in our heart?
I walked in to start a shift in the ER one day, and I was logging onto the computer when I became aware of a spiritual presence. I'd had enough experiences that I recognized what was going on. What I felt over my shoulder was the soul of a woman who was being resuscitated in the next room, and she asked me for help. I walked around the corner into the room where a physician was resuscitating this woman. She was intubated, people were doing chest compressions, she was unconscious, and she continued to communicate with me telepathically. Nobody paid any attention to me. I was in my usual clothing. I worked there, so nobody thought anything of me being in the room. I walked over and put my hand on her leg. I let it rest on her leg because I've learned how important touch can be in these kind of experiences. And as I touched her, she asked me if she could leave. And my initial thought was, why in the world would you ask me that question? But as I thought that, something came to me from some divine place. And I answered back to her silently, of course. And no one else in the room was aware of what was going on. I said, if you feel like it's time for you to go and you think that's the right thing for you to do, I think it's probably okay for you to go. And as I thought that, as I communicated that with her, she rose up out of her body and she stood in the air above the gurney. She appeared to be about half the age of the body she'd just come out of. She was filled with love and light, and she was so grateful. She thanked me for what I'd done, which seemed like nothing to me. And then she left. And as I exited the room, I heard the physician pronounce in military time her death. And I thought, yeah, I know, I saw her leave. And I went out and logged onto the computer and started my shift. That's how my day began. The reason I share that is because it's so important for us to realize the spiritual realm is right here all the time. And when we tune into it, we can have these experiences and we can feel that love, that infinite love. That's what's common amongst all the near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences that I've heard people describe. Some of them have had dark experiences, yes, but they almost always have a profound experience with love and light. And I agree with you. That's what we're here to learn. That's what we're here to experience. And we get so distracted by things that don't matter.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that's what's impressed me a lot with the near-death experiences. So everyone you mentioned, I've read their books. I love near-death experiences. And that is the one thing that I think is just amazing and beautiful is that they talk about almost swimming in this love energy and it's just permeating everything. And I think it is the power that holds the cosmos together. It is all that is. And I think it's a worthwhile journey to go on to learn how to access that love, learn how to be in it. Sometimes I feel like the symbolism of baptism is immersing ourselves in God's love, in that surrounding energy of love is, when we're baptized, we're committing to being in that love energy. And in the scriptures, God is love. It says that, like, this is what we're seeking. And so to me, that's like the epitome of life and these spiritual experiences that we're practicing. So I appreciate
Yeah.
hearing that.
Since you brought it up, and since you have a largely Christian audience, I'll add to what you just described about baptism. It's explicitly stated in scripture that baptism is a representation of birth or rebirth, of death, burial, and resurrection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had an experience one day when I actually was given a vision and I saw what baptism represented. And I saw us desiring to be immersed in the liquid element.
Mm-hmm.
We looked down here at earth and we begged to come. And we were told, wait a minute, that's going to be tough. That's a difficult experience. Yeah, but I want to go.
Huh.
And it was explained, you won't be able to see as clearly as you do now. You won't be able to hear me as like you do now. You won't be able to move about. It'll be like you'll be in water. And we said, yes, but I want to go. And so we were immersed in this liquid element. Our bodies are mostly water.
Love this. Yes.
And so we don't see as clearly as we once did. We don't hear the voice of the Lord the way we once could. We don't move about as freely and as quickly as we once did. All of these impediments are imposed upon us by our own choice to come. And someday we will be raised up out of the water and we'll be able to see clearly again and discern between right and wrong. We'll be able to hear the voice of the divine. We'll be able to move freely and run and do things that we can't do in the physical form. And I understood baptism as a representation of mortality, the whole of mortality, from birth to death to resurrection, everything. In an instant of baptism is a representation of our whole mortal journey. And the reason that was so profound for me, the reason that was so earth-shattering for me was I realized many people embrace baptism thinking they're becoming members of an exclusive club, that they're being different somehow, and they're in this small select group now. And I realized, no. If you understood what baptism represented, you'd realize everybody's already embraced it. They're already here. They're in the water. And so you look at everybody and you realize not that you're different, but that we're all alike. And that's how I view baptism now.
Ah, I love it. That's my favorite. That is amazing. I completely resonate with that. And that is so beautiful to think, because we are what, 70 to 80% water. And I'm a swimmer. And so I grew up competitive swimming, and it is muffled when you're in the water. You can't hear people cheering for you. You can't hear those people outside of the water, rooting you on and saying, keep going, good job. And so I love that vision. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
my favorite. Well, Jeff, I've just loved our conversation and meeting you. I think I want to schedule lunch with you sometime. I saw on your website you do lunches.
Yes, that's a wonderful thing. When I first set up my website, I put that on there, lunch with Jeff. Buy me lunch at a nice place and I'll give you 2 hours. And I've met with 100 or so people and the most profound and wonderful experiences talking with them. People have really profound spiritual experiences that they hold in their heart and they never share with anybody. And a lot of them have told me, you're the first person I've ever told this to.
Wow. Don't you love that people feel safe with you to share their spiritual experiences? Because I do think we do hold them tender and sacred. And sometimes we are nervous to share because we're not sure who will receive them to the level that they impacted us. And I feel like that's one of the purposes of this podcast, is to create a space where people can say, will you hear my story that really impacted me, my moment with God, my moment with divine? And I've noticed that I sometimes feel like I hold that space for people as well. Come and share your stories with me. And I've done that for years before I started this podcast. But I think it's a sacred role to play for one another, to say, I'll hear because I've been there too, and I
Right,
recognize it.
right.
So
I
I love that.
absolutely agree. And one of the things that became clear to me over the years when I finally started to share, because I didn't share anything for a long time, when I finally felt that it was right to share, I was given the understanding some experiences are for you and some are given to you to share, to help others. I try to share what feels right. I was getting a lot of pressure not too long ago from some friends to do a YouTube channel and to put some videos on YouTube. And I was really reluctant. I'm really self-conscious about being on camera and things. And I didn't want to do it. And one day I heard this cowering voice in my mind, my own voice saying, what if my message isn't good enough? And then I heard the voice I've heard for decades say, it's not your message. It was a good ego check for me.
Right.
So a few weeks went by. I felt like, yeah, I need to do this. And a few weeks went by and something woke me up at about 3 a.m. and I couldn't go back to sleep for an hour or so. I tried to get back to sleep. And finally I said, why did you wake me up? And a messenger said, I've given you messages. Why aren't you sharing? So I've started to do a lot more blog posts. I haven't done the videos yet. I'm planning on doing those, but I've posted a bunch of things on my website, blog posts, including this very experience about why I share. And it feels like I'm doing the right thing.
I love that. And I've noticed that. I follow you on Facebook, and you've been posting a lot more of your blog posts on Facebook. And I am edified whenever I read them. So I was told to do this podcast. And I think we all have like this imposter syndrome, this fear of inadequacy. I'm not good enough. I'm not ready. And it's interesting because the Spirit makes up the difference. It isn't us that's doing it. And I think our purpose often is to be instruments for God's message. And he will use who he can, who's open, who's receptive, who's willing to share. And I think that you are one of those people that is willing to be a messenger. And so, with that willingness, the Lord says, okay, I can use you. I can use you to reach these people that need to hear whatever they need to hear. For me, I know I've benefited so much from hearing your thoughts, and I just appreciate your willingness to share. Is there any other last words of wisdom or experiences that you feel impressed to share it before we close?
I was in meditation one day, and in my meditation, I was on a beach. And in my mind, it felt like I was up in the Pacific Northwest. And I walked out of this dense, beautiful evergreen forest out onto a beach that seemed to go on forever. And I walked right out into the water. Like you, I've always loved being in the water. And it felt like I could swim forever without getting tired. And it felt like I could hold my breath forever and swim under the water, which I love to do. I had this profound experience in the water. And then I came back out on the beach and I stood on the beach facing west. The sun was bright in the sky and I put my arms out to my side with my palms up. And I just felt this profound warmth start to fill my soul. And I noticed this light in my palms that coalesced into a ball of light in each palm, if you will. And just reflexively, I brought my arms forward in front of me until my hands touched and the balls merged into one. I brought it close to my chest and pressed it against my chest until it moved inside of me and it filled every cell with light. But it was more than light. It was love. It was power and energy. It was the essence of all things. And it was me. I became that. And in the midst of that, I heard a voice say, "You are the light." Initially, I kind of trembled. I thought, oh, that's too big. And I remembered my Christian upbringing, my Christian background, when Christ said, "I am the light." But then in the Sermon on the Mount, he told his followers, "You are the light." And I realized it wasn't figurative, it was literal. And I realized, I understood that day in my meditation who I was and who everybody is. You are the light. And he never said, be falsely humble and hide it from anybody else. And what he said was, put it on a mountain and let everyone see it. So be the light.
Amen. I love that. We'll end there because that is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.